Shri Sai Ram. We are very happy to once again enjoy this journey of Samarpan. The 122nd edition of Samarpan, we are blessed to listen and experience these exquisite moments of intimacy which Bhagawan has bestowed to our English teacher Gautam Datt. He had joined in our batch in 1988 in Vrindavan. My first memories of Gautam sir was more of a sportsman. He looked more like a well-built basketball player, very less an English teacher. But this edition of Samarpan shows a fantastic aspect of Gautam sir. Not the physical Gautam sir we know of, not the music which he used to play in the band, but the spiritual side of Gautam sir. And it is indeed a revelation. I am absolutely delighted that in this 122nd edition of Samarpan, in the month of July, this amount of intimacy with Bhagawan, the detailing, is something we must all cherish. One must always go up in life, and I emphasize on the word U and P. U stands for Udhampur, from where Gautam sir and his family started their journey, and P stands for Puttaparthi, where they finally ended up, the final destination. Without taking much time, let us enjoy these deeply spiritual experiences of our English teacher Gautam sir, GD sir as we used to call him. He looked more like a sportsman, very much like an English teacher. But when you listen to this talk, you will know what kind of a person or what kind of person Swami has molded Gautam sir into. So let us enjoy this 122nd edition of Samarpan. Welcome Gautam sir for this spiritual satsang. Jai Sai Ram.
Om Param Brahma Param Jyoti Paramatmane Sri 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 Sathya Sai Bhagawan Namostute. I offer my most humble and loving salutations at the Divine Lotus feet. Swami once pointed out to me, history is his story. It took me several years to understand this Brahma Sutra. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, sloka 14, Krishna says, everywhere are his hands and feet, eyes, heads and faces. His ears too are in all places, for he pervades everything in the universe. In Gita Vahini, chapter 12, Swami wrote, Krishna says, it is truer to say that all is Brahman than to say Brahman is in everything. So if at any time during this talk you get the feeling that I am the protagonist of this narrative, please forgive my shortcoming as a narrator. Like he saved Gajendra, he saved me and the members of my family from the crocodile of ignorance or Maya. My own life's direction took a complete 180-degree turn after I came into contact with him. From a predominantly Western culture, I came to know about my Indian roots, about which I knew nothing. My mind moved from materialism to spiritualism. I became a vegetarian, from being a meat eater. And I moved from aggression to peace. How can we ever repay the debt we owe him? We can't. Swami once told a group of students that even if they made him shoes using the skin of their bodies, they would not be able to repay their debt to him. All of us fall in that category. We can only remain forever grateful. This talk will cover my journey from a little town in Kashmir called Udhampur till all of my family members reached the shelter of the divine umbrella at Puttaparthi. My journey began on 23rd November 1981. It started with a small negotiation with my mother about attending the last phase of the 24-hour bhajans, which were arranged by the small group of devotees that lived in Udhampur. A few days prior to Swami's birthday, my mother requested my father, who of course agreed very readily, inform my brother that he was to attend the bhajan. Of course, my brother didn't have a choice. He was youngest in the family. The only problem was me. So my mother had to, I was a teenager. I just finished my schooling and I had entered into university, into college. So I was the problem, and she knew that she had to persuade me. So she came to my room. I remember that day. So you can just imagine the scene. I usually close the doors because my music used to play very loudly. So she knocked on my door and I opened it. When she entered my room, rock music was playing, Western rock music, loudly. So she asked me to, turn down the volume. I did that. And then she looked at me and said, I want you to promise me something. The moment she said that, I became suspicious. As teenagers, when parents say, I want you to promise something, it's not going to be something that I'm going to like. So obviously, I hesitated. And I told her, I said, first tell me what it is that you want, then I'll promise. And she said, no, first you must promise, you'll do what I say, then I'll tell you. But I didn't agree. So seeing me adamant, she told me, she said, I want you to attend the last couple of hours of Swami's bhajan on 23rd November. I looked at her very quizzically and I said, Mother, I'm a young boy, a young man. Look at the kind of music I'm listening to here. Do you think I really enjoy attending bhajans? I'm not that old. And then she looked straight into my eyes and pleaded, She said, can't you do this for my sake? When a mother pleads with her son like that, how can the son refuse? So I agreed, but I had a condition. And I told her, I said, I will attend the bhajan on one condition. The car keys should be left with me. So in case I don't like it there or I get bored, which is what I expected actually, I will take the car and return home. She very readily agreed because, she told me, she said, that's not a problem. We can get a lift from any one of the other people who will attend the bhajans. It was a close-knit group there. Most of them were from the military and they knew each other. So getting a lift would not be a problem. So on this condition, I agreed to attend Swami's bhajan, birthday bhajan. The day arrived. My mother was already attending the bhajan. My father, my brother, myself, we all got ready. And we got into the car and drove to the place where the bhajan was being held. The bhajan was being held in the house of an old devotee who lived in Udhampur, one Colonel Ratan, who was retired and had settled there. So we reached there and we entered the bhajan hall. Of course, the keys were with me. The car keys were with me. So as I remember entering the bhajan hall, we sat cross-legged on the floor, and I looked around. There were pictures not only of Swami, but there were also pictures of sages and saints. And people were singing bhajans with gusto. I remember being quite self-conscious, so I didn't join in the singing. I just sat there quietly. After a few minutes, a deep calm descended on me. All my agitation, all my restlessness, all my worries seemed to be dissolving and disappearing. And after some more time, a great peace descended into my heart. I had never experienced anything like this. And I was lost, in that feeling. It's an amazing feeling. Um, the Bible describes it as the peace that passeth all understanding. It was something like that. I got totally lost in that feeling. And before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. I had not left the bhajan hall. And Aarti started. People started getting up for the Aarti, getting up and standing for the Aarti. And then I broke from my reverie and I also stood up, joined the Aarti with my hands folded. I was still not singing. The Aarti got over, Swami's Vibhuti Prasadam came around, Prasadam was also distributed. My parents were surprised to still see me there. But of course, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I was mesmerized. I was, totally immersed in that beautiful feeling of peace. And of course, nobody else also wanted to talk because everybody, they don't want to break the feeling that you get after attending Swami's bhajan. So quietly, not talking too much, we got into our car and returned home. And that was that. The coming Thursday, my mother got a shock. Every evening, I had the habit of going for a ride. I loved horse riding. And there was nothing that could stop me from my routine, especially horse riding. I loved horses and I loved horse riding. So when she saw me all dressed and bathed and dressed and ready, for the bhajan, she got a shock. She looked at me, but she didn't say anything. And she said, "Aren't you going for riding?" I said, "No, I want to come with you for bhajan." She didn't say anything. She allowed me to accompany her. We went for the bhajan. And after that, I became a regular member of the bhajan group. So I started attending bhajan with her regularly. She used to attend bhajan regularly, so I also started attending with her. Of course, she never asked me any questions. And I guess she took it as a miracle of Swami, which it was. So life continued, but now with a slight difference. I was an avid sportsman. I played cricket for Himachal Pradesh state. I had played Cooch Bihar, which is the equivalent of the Ranji Trophy for under-19s. I was in the swimming team for Haryana, and I had won many medals. I was a really good athlete, specializing in high jump and the middle distance race like the 800 meters. And at that particular time, I was poised to start my mountaineering training in Kashmir. So with all of this, all my sports activities, my routine continued, but with the addition of a little bit of seva activities, and I slowly started getting up, and doing Omkar and Suprabhatam. Somebody presented me with a Shiva Lingam, and they advised me that I must pray to it every day. So a little bit of puja rituals became a part of my routine. And then, I began to do some meditation, which was actually sleep-induced meditation, as I call it, at Udhampur. I used to get up early in the morning and do a short meditation for about 15 minutes, as Swami had advised, and out of the 15 minutes, I'm sure I must have slept for at least 12 minutes. So, or at least dozed. So that was how life changed, started changing. Now, the next thing that happened with me, a very interesting experience. As when you become one becomes a new devotee, certain questions keep popping up in the mind. The monkey mind, keeps like Swami says. Um, my deputy headmaster used to say, it's like like a monkey on hot bricks. And Swami also says this is monkey mind. So my monkey mind had some doubts and some questions had been troubling me. So they were. I never asked anybody for the answers, but they were constantly there at the back of my mind. And as usual with everybody, most of these questions relate to us, and most of the questions are about problems and stuff like that. So those questions were there at the back of my mind, and I think the main question was, if God is everything and God controls everything, then how come we have to suffer? Basically, that was a major question. At that time, Swami decided to send me his visiting card. He says miracles are my visiting card. So he decided to send me one. One evening, my mother wanted to go and visit the house of Colonel Ratan to meet Mrs. Ratan, and she asked me to accompany her. It was evening time, I remember. After the aarti, we did aarti at home, and we got into the car. My mother was driving. We went there, and they were talking. I was sitting quietly. I think one of their sons, the eldest son, was there. So as we were sitting, the lady of the house, Mrs. Ratan, she suddenly looked at me and she said, I've got something for you, which I've kept and I wanted to give you. And she went in and she came out with, those days they had these pocket calendars. And the pocket calendar usually had a picture of Swami on one side and the calendar at the back. So she brought me one of these pocket calendars and she said, I've kept this for you. And she advised me, she said, you should keep it in your pocket all the time when you are going out anywhere from the house and so on. So I took that pocket calendar and then she continued talking to my mother. They were discussing something. I didn't pay attention because I started looking at the picture, Swami's picture. Swami was dressed in a beautiful yellow robe and he looked really majestic in that picture. So I was admiring that picture, and as I was looking at it, I suddenly noticed that in the right bottom corner, something was appearing. Some kind of writing was appearing. So first I thought, my eyes were deceiving me, and so I looked closely, and I realized, no, it wasn't. I wasn't being deceived. There was some writing which was slowly appearing from the corner of that pocket postcard. So I exclaimed because it surprised me, and I exclaimed and I said, "See, look what's happening!" Everybody crowded around me, and all of them saw this signature, Swami's signature, started appearing, which was appearing. It suddenly became, clearer and clearer, until it became perfectly clear, and it was written very clearly in that corner down below, with blessings, Bhagawan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. If you analyze it, if somebody has to sign that particular small corner, it will be very difficult. And this experience of the signature, appearing from nothing, it really surprised me, and everybody was equally surprised. And Mrs. Ratan, she told me, she said, if I had known that this was going to happen, I would not have given you the calendar. I would have kept it myself. So I said to her, I said, you can keep this if you want. And she said, no, this is meant for you. Swami has blessed you, and she gave me the calendar. So I put it in my pocket, and I began thinking about what had happened. So, when Swami, such a miracle or such a extraordinary event takes place, when Swami does these things, there is a little bit of energy that comes with it. And I felt that energy. And, I was lost in that particular energy also. And also I was thinking about how it could happen. How is it possible? How is it possible? How did Swami do it, etc. So then we sat in the car, and as we were driving home, I took out the photo, the pocket calendar again, because I hadn't turned it around till then, and I turned it around, and lo and behold, the answer to my question was right there. There was no calendar at the back. There was a saying of Baba, and the saying was very simple: God is like a postman. He delivers the letter, but he doesn't know the contents of the letter. Right? So in some letters there is sad news, in some letters there are good news, but the postman has no idea about it. He just delivers the letter. So God is like that. And that was the answer to my question. It answered my question perfectly. So this was one of the first experiences which I had, of Swami, and it was followed by some more, but this was amazing. So I was really moved, and I started thinking a little more deeply about Bhagwan and his words, his um, advice which he gave to people, and so on. So at that time, I was studying science, undergraduate science, and I was majoring in physics, and I was preparing for an IIT exam. So while preparing, I became a little tired, and I decided that on that particular evening I would like to go and play golf. So I told my mother, I said, I'm tired and I would like to play golf. But she was not happy, because she said, IIT exam is very difficult. And in a place like Udhampur, in those days, as it is, classes to prepare for IIT were very, very rare. Now it's readily available everywhere. And at this present time, you can attend online also. But in those days, in a small town like Udhampur, it would be very difficult to find anybody, who would give you training to attend these particular classes and prepare for IIT. So I had to do all the preparation myself, and I had to work really hard. And my mother was worried that I would not pass the exam. So she told me, she said, I don't think you should go for golf. You should focus more on your study. Just have a cup of tea or something to take a break, and then get back to your studies and all. I didn't agree, so we had a kind of argument. And finally, at the end, I said, no, I'm going. She was not happy. So obviously, if she must have prayed to Baba. I don't know. I'm sure she would have prayed to Baba. I feel. I'm sure she would have prayed. So I went for golf. So you can imagine, it was a beautiful golf course, an army golf course, and I used to go there once in a while. As I was standing on the first tee and I was about to tee off, a Jawan comes, an army Jawan. He approaches me and he says, "Do you really like this game?" So I kind of ignored him because I was concentrating on my shot. And then he said again, "Why are you wasting your time playing this game? This is a game meant for old people. You should be studying. Do you really enjoy this game?" So I gave him a look, and but I didn't say anything. I played my shot. I continued with my game. But what he said kept on repeating in my mind until I realized, why would a military Jawan who doesn't know me, I've never seen him before, why would he approach me? And first of all, no Jawan would tell something like that to anybody there, because all the people who came there were officers and officers' children. So why would he say that? And by the time I reached the ninth hole, I realized that something was amiss. So I went back to the clubhouse and I looked for that Jawan. So because usually when the people are working there, they would be there. So I looked for him. He was nowhere to be found. And then I realized it must be Swami. Swami was telling me, you should be studying. So then I packed up my golf bags and got back home. Of course, I didn't say this to my mother, because then she'll bring it up every time. So this was the second experience that I had of Swami, which was also quite amazing. So I realized that, Swami could appear in another form and anywhere he wants to. So after some time, news came that Swami was going to come to Delhi. So the next agenda for all the devotees in Udhampur was preparing to go to Delhi, were being made, and there were a lot of things to do. People to prepare for the journey. Tickets had to be booked. It had to be decided who would join the group, who would go and who would not go, and how we would be able to manage to get there, and things like that. So there were a lot of meetings with devotees, and finally a group was created to go for Swami's darshan. And in my family, it was decided that my mother and my younger brother would attend that particular journey and have Baba's darshan in Delhi. Of course, everybody was excited because it became possible to have Swami's darshan since he was coming so close to Delhi. And then when the last week came, things suddenly changed because the group suddenly decided that they needed somebody young, to take care of things and to help, all the elderly people there in that group. So suddenly it was decided that my brother would not go, and in his stead, I would be the one who would have to accompany the group. So I took it as Swami's will, that Swami wanted me to come there. So finally, it happened that I accompanied the group, and it was a wonderful journey. It took time because we had to travel from Udhampur to Jammu and then catch a train from Jammu. And those days trains didn't come on exactly on time. So we traveled from Jammu to Delhi. It took more than 2 days, and the journey was blissful because the group was there. They were talking about Swami. They were singing bhajans, and my job was to run all the errands. Get water, make arrangements which people needed, get food, order food. Make sure that it came and things like that. So it was very very busy and blissful. So when we reached Delhi, we arrived in time before Swami so that we could be ready to receive him when he came to Delhi. So the first darshan we had was when Swami got off the flight and went straight to Sohanlalji's house, and we were lucky enough to get a place, to be allowed to enter in his house, and then we were allowed to sit in the garden. We were one of the few who were allowed to sit in the garden, and we were waiting for Swami. What was fascinating was there was this huge crowd gathered outside Sohanlalji's house, but it was so disciplined, and no, there was no noise, and there was no untoward incident, people quarreling, people pushing, people shoving. All this was not there. It was very disciplined. They were quietly and patiently waiting for Swamis to arrive. And then Swami came from the airport. He got down and directly got into the car and came to Sohanlalji's house. So suddenly I realized that everything became quiet, and then Swami came. Swami's car had arrived. There was a murmur running through the crowd. Swami has come. Swami has come. Swami stepped out of his car, and then he entered the gate of the house, and that was the first time I saw him. And it was a bit of a shock for me because in his pictures, Swami doesn't look so short. But when I saw him in real life, he looked short and very slight, you know, um, very very frail and thin. So that was the first impression I got. And first I saw the top of his hair, which was he was surrounded by people, and between over the shoulders and over their heads I could see Swami's hair, top of Swami's crown of hair. And then I saw glimpses of his robe, his yellow robe between the people who were moving along with him. He entered Sonlalji's house, and after some time, he emerged out onto the veranda and into the garden, and he gave darshan. So there was a group of monks sitting next to me, Buddhist monks who were sitting next to me, and Swami came around. He passed in front of me. I didn't have the idea, that time that we could reach out and touch Swami's feet and things. I was just looking at him, and he passed by me, and he stopped in front of this group of Buddhist monks. He started speaking with them, and he waved his hand in a circular motion and created vibhuti for them, and then gave it to each one of them, and gave them pad namaskar, and spent a few minutes there. Now, for me, this was not something extraordinary. I mean, it didn't strike me as something extraordinary because I had already experienced some of things that Swami could do, and I had already kind of accepted him as a divine being. And even in my house, my mother had Swami's picture next to her bedside, and off and on the picture would be showered with amritam, drops of amritam, and so on. So I had seen a lot of these things, and also I had read how Swami would create vibhuti and then cure people and by giving them that vibhuti. So it didn't strike me as anything surprising. I accepted it as something that he could do. So, and then he moved on. He gave darshan to everybody, and he went inside. And then we were waiting for him. He emerged a couple of times after that. He stood on the veranda and he looked at the crowd which was sitting in the garden. He looked at the crowd which was outside the walls of the house. And from time to time he blessed people, and just stood in the veranda looking at everybody. And then he would go in, and then after some time he would come out again and do the same. So after some time, a person came out and he said, Swami has retired for lunch, so we should all leave. So we left and we proceeded. We immediately rushed to the next place that Swami was going to give darshan, which was in a huge maidan called Talkatora Gardens in Delhi, where Swami was going to give public darshan. So we went there. The Samiti had arranged a huge shamiana, and there was a massive crowd already there. Mrs. Malhotra had managed to, arrange for one pass. So, of course, I told my mother, I said, you should take the pass and have Swami's darshan. So she was able to sit with the VIPs in the front to have Swami's darshan. I sat with the crowd, somewhere in the crowd. I happened to bump into some schoolmates, I remember. They were very embarrassed to see me there, but they were on their way out. I was on my way in, so we didn't chat a lot. So anyway, when I found a place for myself to sit, I looked around and I saw there were people chatting happily, talking about Swami, talking about Swami's philosophy, discussing things which are spiritual. And then I looked at I saw the Seva Dal running here and there, doing the duty, very, very busy. So watching all this happening around me, time passed very quickly. And then after a couple of hours, suddenly the crowd became quiet and silent, and a deep calm descended on the place, and I knew Swami had arrived. And people began craning their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of his divine form. So, when I look back, I think, Blessed people throughout the ages must have witnessed avatars walking among the people, among them. And now, at that time, I was also one of them. Though I didn't realize it, I didn't realize the privilege that I had, but now I do. When I look back, I do. I say to myself, I was also one of the people who saw the avatar walking among the people. So it was such a moving sight to see him there, uh, walking among the multitude which had gathered there. All eyes followed him wherever he went, and those eyes had a range of expressions as he passed by. Some were hopeful, some anxious, some in prayer, some beseeching, some delighted, some inquiring. It was fantastic just to see, the human in the interaction of the human and the divine. Swami's divine glance passed over all of them, blessing them with his Abhaya Hasta. Sometimes he would stop to speak words of advice or encouragement here and there. He walked till the end of the crowd, which was huge. It was a long walk. And from time to time, he would be circling his hand, as he does like that. I'm sorry, I should not be imitating him, but just to give you an example, he would be circling his hand, uh, you know, in the air in his inimitable, gentle, divine way, releasing waves of energy we could not see. And then sometimes he would write in the air, like that, as you would have seen if you had Darshan of Swami. Thus he made his way to his throne on the stage. And then a gentleman got up and he spoke in Hindi, introducing Swami to the crowd. And then Swami got up and began his discourse. When he started speaking, no sound came until somebody realized that the mic was switched off, and they rushed onto the stage and they switched on the mic for Swami. And then Swami, in a very delightful gesture, he put his head on the space between there were two mics, and Swami put his head in the middle, as if to say, what a blunder. And then smiled very, very, in a very gentle way, and then looked up at everybody, and then continued his discourse. So, Swami, when he begins his discourse, he begins by reciting a Telugu poem, which he sings. So he began with he started singing his this Telugu poem. Of course, I didn't understand Telugu at that time. So he started singing this Telugu poem. The moment his voice fell on my ears, something deep inside me moved, moved me. His voice really moved me. And something deep inside me welled up. And the feeling was that this is the person I had been searching for all my life. It was an amazing feeling. It wasn't conscious. It welled up from within me. And when it did, I was also taken by surprise. And I looked at Swami. He was at a distance. And, I was listening to his voice. And then I did something. I took a vow to myself. I made a vow to myself. I said, I would not eat or drink anything except water until Swami spoke to me. So I made this vow to myself. In that moment, the vow was made. After a few minutes, I realized what I had done. But of course, it was the feeling was very strong. So I had decided that this is what I would do. And Swami finished his discourse. Aarti took place. Swami left the stage. We all went home. And then when we sat at the dinner table, we were staying with my father's aunt and uncle, who were both doctors, good doctors, and very well-known and famous doctors in Delhi, internationally also. And when I refused to eat, my father's aunt, my great aunt, she was worried because she thought, she's a doctor, she thought something was wrong with me. My mother was also worried. And they started when I said no, nothing is wrong with me. I just don't feel like eating. They didn't accept that, so they tried to force me to eat. And my mother had sensed that something was amiss, so she kept pestering me. Why aren't you eating? Why aren't you eating? And when they started forcing me, I had to tell them that I had made such and such vow, and I could not eat my food. So they were all very shocked, and my father's uncle said, "What if he doesn't talk to you? What will happen?" I said, "Well, then I can't eat. I guess I just have to live on water." My mother was, started scolding me because she got really worried, and she said, "This is not something that you should do. This is not right. I don't think you should do this. I think you should start eating." But I stuck to my guns. I didn't eat, and from that day onwards, I started fasting. So the next day we had darshan of Swami in the in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and there also I had a wonderful experience. So we were again very lucky to be allowed to sit inside the auditorium, because the demand to have Swami's darshan was infinite. I mean, they were, Delhi is the seat of power, and there were people who were very powerful who wanted to attend the discourses, have Swami's darshan, have his blessing. And, there was a huge demand. But by Swami's grace, we managed to be there. And we were sitting somewhere in the middle, my mother and me, and other members of the group. When Swami entered the hall, he walked up the steps to where we were sitting. It was an auditorium, with like step-like seating. So he walked up till where we were sitting. He walked up, as usual, slowly giving darshan, and he reached where we were sitting, and then, how Swami can look at you even among the crowd, and you know that he's looking at you. So he looked directly at me. I'm a very proud person. I'm a Punjabi, and one of the things, one of the which ego that we had, Punjabis have, we don't bow our heads in front of anybody. In a very filmy dialogue, you can say कि सिर कट जाएगा लेकिन किसी के सामने झुकेगा नहीं, like that. So that kind of ego was there. But when Swami looked at me, he looked at me and he gave his abhaya. My hands folded by themselves, my head bowed down, and this was done spontaneously, not consciously. And then Swami moved on till the top of the hall and then moved back down. But I was still in that posture. Nobody paid attention to me till then, because everybody was watching. They had their eyes on Swami. They were watching Swami. Then suddenly my mother noticed that I was still in that particular posture, and Swami had almost he had started climbing the steps to the stage, and she shook me and said, "Look up, Swami has reached the stage." So I was still bending sideways like that, and I looked up and Swami was on the stage, and it surprised me because I did not make that action consciously. It was as if the Jivatma recognized the Paramatma and pushed the ego aside and saluted, the divine being. So Swami and Swami, when he reached the stage, he gave a wonderful discourse. The whole evening was filled with divine energy, and after listening to Swami's discourse, we were lifted to the seventh heaven, literally. And to me, it looked as if Swami was speaking to me only, because he kept referring to, his students during the discourse. In fact, he began by talking of the 4 Fs. And he said, he started by saying, "I always tell my students to follow the master, fight the devil, fight to the end, and finish the game." And he gave a very energetic discourse. And by the time he finished and took Aarti and left, we were in another world. And we went home, we were in absolute bliss. So days passed like that. I was still fasting. People were still worried about me. My mother, tried to, tried her level best that I should break my vow. She took, I love chaat, so she took me to my favorite chaat place, which is like one of the places where you get the best chaat in Delhi. And when the shop opens, the chaat disappears, in just an hour or so. So that's how famous it was. And she took me there between Swami's darshans, to have lunch at one time. She thought that I would be enticed, but I wasn't. I didn't eat. I was adamant. I stuck to my guns, and so days passed. And then suddenly, as we sat for dinner one night, I clearly heard Swami's voice in my heart. You read about it in the scriptures, and you see it on the TV serials, some Akashvani, like that. So that was the first time I heard Swami's voice inside me. And Swami said very clearly, it was very clear, he said, "Eat your food, I will talk to you tomorrow." And it was so convincing, I reached out, I was sitting on the dining table with the others, I reached out and I took a helping of one thing and something, I don't remember, I think it was rice. I put it on my plate. Now the moment I did that, again people were shocked, and they said to me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to eat my dinner." He said, "You want to break your vow?" I said, "No, Swami will speak to me tomorrow, so I'm going to eat." Now they were all trying to dissuade me. "No, no, please don't do that. Don't, it's wrong to do that." And my mother was worried, and don't do that. I said, "No, I'm going to eat," and I ate my dinner, and we went to bed. Next morning, when we got up and early, we finished our Suprabhatam. The moment we finished Suprabhatam, the phone rang. Mrs. Malhotra was on the line. She talked to my mother and she said, "Swami is going to visit one devotee's house." It was Colonel Beri. He's going to visit his house, and Colonel Beri has agreed that I can bring you and Gautam with me. So would you like to come? And of course, we said yes, yes, we would like to come. We were all excited, and I was very excited because after that, after I ate my dinner, I had some doubts when I was sleeping that maybe I could not have, maybe I just imagined everything. But when that happened, then I knew that I was going to have Swami's close darshan. So anyway, we'd see what happened. So next morning, Swami was supposed to do Bhumi Puja for his school, which was being opened there. And we attended that Bhumi Puja. So I was told to sit in a place where I could escape easily. So because we had to go to Colonel Beri's house, and that was another fantastic, darshan of Swami's. Swami did the Bhumi Puja. He created the gems, and he created a necklace for the Purohit's wife and something for the Purohit. And then there were these pictures, big pictures of Swami, life-size pictures of Swami, which were arranged in rows, next to the stage. And Swami walked among those pictures, and he would just make a gesture of throwing with his hand, and clouds of vibhuti would materialize and would cover the pictures. So he would be throwing vibhuti, left and right while he walked through those pictures, blessing each one of them. And of course, he gave a discourse, and then when the discourse got over, Swami left the stage, and I was wondering how to get out of the crowd, and suddenly the flap of the tent parted where I was sitting, and somebody called me out. I rushed out through that hole and piled into a car, and we all, went to Colonel Beri's house. Now, we were told by Mrs. Malhotra, "Don't tell anybody that he's visiting Colonel Beri's house. It's a secret." So imagine my surprise when we reached Colonel Beri's house. A huge crowd was already there. People already knew that Swami was going to come there. Somehow Swami's visit cannot be kept secret. And for me, that was, another new experience. Okay, we were supposed to keep. How did people come to know? there was a massive crowd outside his house, and then we went and we sat inside the house in his drawing room, and Swami's chair was arranged there, and I was sitting at the back. I was the last person sitting in the last row. So just before Swami came, Colonel Beri made an announcement. He said, "See, when Swami comes, he will come and sit on his chair. You can all have his darshan, and then he would like to talk to the family members. So I request you all to move out into the garden so that he can talk to the family members." So I heard that. Everybody heard it, and Swami came, in his his beautiful form. He entered and he sat on the chair which was there for him, and then for some time he looked around, and then he told Colonel Beri, "I want to see the house." So he and the members of his family escorted Swami into the house to show them the house, and of course Swami gave them an interview inside, obviously. But now Colonel Beri, so this is what happened. Colonel Beri had said, once you have had darshan, go out and stand out in the garden so that Swami can be with the family. So I got up and I went out into the garden through the sliding doors. And I didn't realize that I was the only one. So, because the moment I went out, people started calling me and waving letters to me and say, "Please give it to Swami." So I was distracted, and I was trying not to respond. And I didn't realize that I was the only person standing in the garden. And then Swami had finished seeing the house, finished talking to the family members. He came back and he sat in his chair. Now, when he sat in his chair, I was the only person standing in the garden. So Swami looked at the people sitting inside. Then he looked at me, and you know, he looked back, and then he looked at me a couple of times, wondering what I was doing there all alone. And then, see, this is where the prophecy comes true. He said, "Hey boy, come and sit inside." So now the vow was fulfilled, because I said I will not eat or drink until Swami talks to me, and he talked to me. So he called me inside, and then he made me sit with his students in the front row. He said, "Sit here." So I sat there. That is like one of the most memorable darshans I ever had of Baba. So I sat there. Now in my mind, again at the back of my mind, this monkey mind, it always keeps on going. I had this idea that if Swami is divine, I will be able to see it in his eyes. So now when I was sitting so near to Swami, I looked up, Swami was looking at me. I looked straight into his eyes. That was the only time I have looked straight into Swami's eyes. After that, I could not, in fact, I don't think anybody can. So when I looked into Swami's eyes, it was again a very out of the world experience. He had such deep eyes. You could walk into them, and they were full of compassion and love. And he let me look into his eyes. He didn't break, looking at me. He allowed me to look at him, and I must have looked at him for more than 30 seconds or even more than a minute. I don't know how time passed. I kept on looking at him until I was satisfied. He allowed me to look at him and look into his eyes. And then when I was satisfied and I said to myself, "Yes, he's divine," then he broke the connection, the side connection, and looked away and looked at somebody else. And then after a few seconds, he told me, "Boy, get up from here and go and sit back where you were sitting earlier." So I got up and I went back and I sat where he was. And whenever I think about this particular experience, my hair stands on end, and I'm totally lost, in that particular moment, which I will never forget. By His grace, I will never forget till I die. And I know I always pray to Swami that even after I die, I should always remember that. That's the kind of amazing experience it was. So now, then Swami, after some time, he got up and he told everybody to take namaskar. So one by one, everybody came and took namaskar. And I was the last one. And I had all these things, because a lot of devotees, they had asked me, those who could not come, somebody wanted a picture blessed by Swami, somebody wanted a book, somebody wanted so on. So I had all these things with me. And I thought it was a good idea to get it blessed by Swami. So I took all of these things with me when I went to take Swami's namaskar. And, I put them down, and one by one I lifted them up to Swami and said, Swami, this is for, so and so, and Swami blessed it. And this is for so and so, and Swami blessed the picture. And then, the books, Swami, this is for so. So one by one, and this is my one book which I had bought, Man of Miracles. So I said, Swami, this is for me, and he blessed it. And he stood there very patiently. And then I did namaskar to him, and as long as I did namaskar, he kept standing. And then when I got up, then he started moving and he left the house. So that was the time when I had Swami's darshan, sparshan, and sambhashan. So now he fulfilled my vow. Now imagine that. They must have been like lakhs of devotees. The whole of North India had descended on Delhi to have Swami's darshan. What fascinated me was, among all those people, he could identify me and create situation where he fulfilled this vow which I had taken. That was the amazing. When I think back, I can't believe it even today. And yes, and so finally, Swami, we stayed there until all of Swami's visit was over. He went and visited other places in North India. We waited until he came back to Delhi, and then finally, when Swami left back to go down south, then we went back to Udhampur. So that was the Delhi visit experience which I had with Swami in 1982, as you can see. So these are a couple of pictures which I have taken from Swami's visit to Kashmir when he came. This is when he came to Kashmir. He stayed in Udhampur. That was the amazing part. And this is the group which was with Swami. On the right, you can see this particular group with Swami Karunyananda and others. And to his left is General Malhotra, where this is General Malhotra's house in Udhampur, where he stayed. And these are some of the officers in uniform with whom Swami took picture. And this is again Mr. and Mrs. General and Mrs. Malhotra, and their house in Udhampur. So Swami stayed with them, as I said. So he was at that time the Army Commander, Northern Command, and he made lovely arrangements for Swami when he came to Kashmir. So they also had wonderful experiences with Swami. So after I came back to Udhampur, of course, we were charged with Swami's darshan, with his energy, and my sadhana developed, and my rituals increased. Now, instead of getting up at 5 o'clock, I started getting up at 3 o'clock, and so on. And I used to practice yoga, so my yoga became more intense because I was a sports person, and I learned yoga to improve my performance in sports. But then yoga now became a different activity with a different purpose altogether, and it became more intense. And the next thing that thing that we had was during the Seva Dal conference in the same year, later in the year. There was a Seva Dal conference in Puttaparthi, so we all decided, the whole family, we decided whether we are going to attend that Seva Dal conference, and we plan to go there to Puttaparthi. And when we reached Puttaparthi, I remember we traveled. Nobody knew how to get to Puttaparthi, first of all. So we had to do a lot of research and digging around, and finally we found out that we could go take a train to Penukonda, and then from Penukonda we had to travel to Dharmavaram, and from Dharmavaram we had to travel to Puttaparthi, so in a Jatka. This is what many of the devotees who were there, they had visited Puttaparthi like a few years ago, and we got it from different sources. At that time, I think General and Minister Malhotra were not there in Udhampur; they had gone somewhere, so we could not find out, how we could get there. So whatever we could find out was this. So then finally we booked a train ride from Jammu to Penukonda, where we had to change trains in Delhi and other places in Ambala, I think. And we reached Penukonda, and from Penukonda we took a bus to Dharmavaram, and from Dharmavaram we took another bus to Puttaparthi. When we reached Puttaparthi, I remember, first of all, the journey was amazing because all devotees together singing bhajans, talking about Swami. It was really blissful. When we reached Puttaparthi, it was early morning. The dawn was breaking. It was a beautiful sight. And Nagar Sankirtan was going on, so we could hear the Nagar Sankirtan. When I stepped off the bus, it was with a divine feeling, and I still remember how beautiful it was. So I stepped off the bus, and then I saw this old gentleman. He was struggling. He had a lot of bags, and he was really old. He must be over 70 or 80. And he was struggling with his bag. So I told my father, I said, I want to help this gentleman, and do you mind if I help him? Do you need help with the luggage? He said, no, there are a lot of young people around. My brother is there, so he will help. You go and help him. So I immediately went to this old gentleman and I said, sir, can I help you? Sai Ram, can I help you? And he said, yes, please. And I took his bags. There were 3 of them, I still remember. I took his bags. And he couldn't walk very fast. So slowly we made our way into the ashram. And everybody had already left. The luggage was taken. Everybody had already gone ahead to the place which was arranged for the Seva Dals. Again, Swami had made some impeccable arrangements for the food, for the place to stay, for everything. So everybody had gone ahead. So I was with this gentleman, and he was moving very slowly. He was shuffling. So very, very slowly we made our way. And after about, let us say, about 20 minutes, we reached the mandir, the lady side of the mandir. And then he was exhausted. So I remember he wanted to sit down. So he said, he went and sat on the boundary wall of Swami's mandir. And Seva Dal came running and they said, no, you cannot sit there. And then I kind of pleaded with them and I said, he's very old. Just give us a few minutes and we'll move. So like that, we made our way to the tents which were made for the Seva Dal people. And on the way, this gentleman told me his experience of the 4 or 5 interviews that he had with Swami. And, he finished it by the time we reached. So each interview, he told me what happened. So, and we passed the time till we reached the tents. We passed the time. And I was, I looked at him in great admiration. And I was like, wow, here is a person who has had Baba's interview, And I looked up at him with great respect. So now this is what Swami does. He brought me together with this gentleman, and then throughout the conference, throughout the time we stayed there, I looked after him. So even things like early morning, I would get up before him. I would arrange for his bath, and then I would take him to have the bath, bring him back, get him his breakfast, lunch, etc., and so on. So I would serve him. So throughout the conference, I did that. And during this time, again, there was a very interesting experience that I had. One morning, when I had finished serving the gentleman, I had to go for my own breakfast. I suddenly overheard 2 people talking loudly. Punjabis, they talk very loudly. So the group with whom we were staying, they're all Punjabis. And these 2 gentlemen talking loudly, and they said, Swami is going to go out somewhere at 7 o'clock in the morning. And let's finish breakfast quickly and have his darshan. So when I looked at the time, it was, 7:15, and I said, I can't miss Swami's darshan. I told my father, I'm going to have Swami's darshan. My father was kind of confused. So, aren't you going to have breakfast? And Swami's darshan is only later, not now. And I said, no. I overheard some people, and I zipped off. So I ran to the mandir. When I reached the mandir, nobody was there. Usually when Swami is going somewhere, a lot of people are there, a lot of crowds are there, but nobody was there. So I was surprised, and but I didn't think too much of it, and I went and I stood at the corner, at that. Now in the Kulwant Rai Hall, there's the gate which is there, the black gate, and the bell. Earlier there was an arch, and there was no gate that used to be open. So, and there were walls on both the sides where the road was leading to the Gopuram, and there was a Ganesh statue. So I went there, and I stood there, um, waiting for Swami to come. And lo and behold, the door opened. Swami stepped out. His car appeared. His red Mercedes car. I still remember. It appeared. He sat in it, and he drove out. And there was nobody there except me. When he drove out of the gate, somebody was sitting with Swami at the back, and I remember I was sitting on Swami was sitting on the far side of the car, and he leaned across this person and he gave me his abhaya. And the car drove past me. I was thrilled. Swami looked at me, Swami gave abhaya. That was more than enough. Just to get those days, even if we saw Swami from a distance, we saw a little bit of his hair, we were very happy. Swami looking at me in the car when he's riding and giving me his abhaya was like, again, not just the seventh heaven, even beyond that. So I was very happy, and by the time people realized Swami's car had already moved out of the Gopuram gate and he had left. So I went back, had my breakfast and came back for darshan, and I sat there. So this was the experience that I had during that particular Seva Dal experience. So the next thing that I'm going to narrate is about the way I joined the college, how I arrived there. Now, when we went back from the Seva Dal conference, of course, the desire to be in Puttaparthi, rose, became stronger and stronger. And of course, my mother also wanted that I should study in Swami's college. So she applied. So Mrs. Malhotra said, they have advertised for the college. So if you want your son to join, please fill the form. So she didn't tell me. She filled the form and she sent it to the university. And we waited for the reply. No reply came. When no reply came, then she consulted Mrs. Malhotra again. She said they didn't reply, and the time for the entrance exam is coming near. So what should I do? And then they decided that they should write to Kasturiji. So again, my mother wrote a letter to Kasturiji explaining everything and saying that I want my son to join Swami's college. And of course, unknown to her, I also wanted to do that, and I had written to Swami that I want to spend my summer holidays at Puttaparthi, and please give me permission to do that, and so on. So after she wrote to Kasturiji, in those days it takes time. It was not like email today. After that, the reply came back, and on the top in a corner it was written, two sentences were written: please send your son immediately to join the college. So on the basis of that, we decided that we should go and go to Puttaparthi. Now, where I was studying I was studying in Udhampur at that time in college. My exams were going on. I was in the middle of my exams. And when my father was informed about this, that we had to take his permission. So we informed him, my mother and me, that we wanted to go to Puttaparthi to give the entrance exams. He put his foot down and he said, no, you can't leave your exams here and then go and give the entrance exam. Next time you can give it. So I pleaded with him and I said, I want to start from the beginning. I want to study in Swami's college from the beginning, from the undergraduate, so that I can get more time to be with Swami. And of course, in my ignorant mind, The idea was that 5 years in Swami's college and I will get self-realization and all that kind of thing, which was really silly. But that that is the way it was. That is the way I was thinking that time. So my father put his foot down, and then we tried to persuade him. So we said, okay, let's take out chits. Many devotees do that. They take chits, and whatever Swami says, we'll do. But he was really scared to do that, and he said, "No way, I'm not going to allow that, and there's no way you're going." So that was it. So we couldn't go. I felt a little disappointed. My mother was very disappointed, but nobody could say anything. Then, this is what happens. Swami does things, in his miraculous way, and what Swami did was my college shut down for enough time for me to go to Puttaparthi and give the exam. So it was, I think, for 2 weeks. There was some by-elections, and the college became the center for the election. So the college was shut down by the government. And then again we approached my father and said, "Look, now we have this gap. So can we go?" And then he agreed. So my mother, my brother, me, we all agreed to go. He couldn't get leave immediately, so he came a little later. We booked the tickets, we left for Puttaparthi. And so now we reached Puttaparthi, but I haven't yet received an acceptance letter I had not received an acceptance letter from the university. So how could I give the exam? So when we reached Puttaparthi, the next morning was the exam. So my mother took me and we went to the ad block, which you can see the picture there in the middle, and we went and met the registrar. And then he said, "No, nothing can be done," and all. And then my mother, she said, "What kind of organization is this? Sometimes you don't reply to to the application which I gave," because till that time we didn't know how things work. So we said, "We applied and you didn't even reply. You should either say no or yes, something." And then we get this letter from you, and then you say, "Come, bring your son to Puttaparthi and to join the college immediately." And then now you're saying it's. So when he saw the letter, he immediately looked at my mother and said, "Since when do you know Swami?" So my mother said, "No, we just became, we are very new devotees. We just started. We had Swami Darshan in Delhi and all that. Personally, we don't know Swami personally and all." And then he looked at this letter and he recognized Swami's handwriting. So he took the letter and he told me, he said, "Here is the application form. Fill the application form and give it to me." So I sat in his office and I completed the application form, and I remember irritating him by asking what I should write here and there and so on. But I filled the application form, I submitted it to him, and then he told me, he said, "You can go and give the exam, tomorrow morning at this time in the institute." So that's how I appeared for the exam. And when I went for the exam, we went early. I was sitting there, and then I saw Swami students who were also applying for the Swami's college and had to give the entrance exam. They all marched in, very disciplined, all in spotless white and white, and their faces were shining, you know. And I looked at them and I said, "There's no way I can get admission in this college." When I compare myself with them, there's no way I can get. Anyway, I sat through the exam, and I did the exam, submitted my paper, and then of course I had to rush back because my college was going to begin, so it would be just enough time for me to reach there. So as I had promised my father, I left with him, and we went back to Udhampur. And then in the meantime, my brother also had to give his exams, so he was also preparing for his exams, and he also gave the exams. And then my mother and brother were staying there in Puttaparthi waiting for the results. And then one day we get a telephone call. So And my mother, excitedly on the phone, she informed me that I had been selected for the college. I had to come for the interview. So since there was no time, I should fly. And of course, so my father made arrangements for me to fly. He was not very happy because I was going to join Swami's college in the first year, and I would lose some years of study and so on. So he was not very happy at that point of time, but he couldn't say anything. He didn't say anything. Yeah, but I could make out that he was not very happy. So anyway, I traveled by plane uh, uh, to the nearest place, which was Hyderabad, and then I think then I came to Puttaparthi by bus. Um, and then I was in time for the interview. So in the interview room, in the interview there was a panel of people, which include the warden, the registrar, the vice chancellor, and so on. And there were quite a few people. And when I had this interview, one of the things that I had written there was, I love riding, horse riding, and they teased me about it, and they told me why you're coming from Kashmir, which is such a beautiful place, why you want to come to this dry place, Puttaparthi, which is a small town and small village and all that. And I remember somebody telling me that you don't get horses here, you only get donkeys, and they all laughed at the joke and so on. So, but I got a hint when I was leaving the interview, just as I was about to exit from that room, the vice chancellor, Professor Gokak, uh, he kind of said that you might have to put up with the donkeys for some time. So when he said that, I got an inkling that I might get admitted. And I met a lot of people. There were a lot of other youngsters who were sons of army officers, but they didn't want to join the college. And this is what happens when we make a kind of wrong decision, and our ego comes in the way. We sometimes make wrong decisions, and then we end up not joining Swami's college. Anyway, these boys, they told me that we purposely didn't do well in the exam because we don't want to join. My parents are forcing me, and so on. So anyway, to make a long story short, I got admitted, and then I joined. So I became Swami's student, and then the time came for me to join the hostel. So I went, as I was joining the hostel, there was another student waiting to join the hostel, and we kind of became friendly. Anyway, the room given to me was A1. So I was admitted in room A1, and I went there. My mother was worried, so she told me to find out everything, like what time you have to get up in the morning, what time and all that. I found out, and then I came to tell her. And then she left for the mandir, and then we were supposed to go in the evening for darshan, Swami's darshan. So I immediately unpacked and got ready, and we went for darshan. So in the evening, when we went for darshan, lo and behold, Swami comes to me, and he talks to me, and he says, he asked me, what is your name? Where do you come from? The moment I said I come from Udhampur, he said, oh, I went to Kashmir, and were you there when I came there? And I said, no, Swami, unfortunately, I was not there at that time, and I missed your visit there. And then he said, I stayed with General Malhotra and all that. And I said, I know, Swami. So he told me a lot of things about his trip. And then finally he asked me, he said, have you come alone or somebody came with you? And I said, no, Swami, my mother and my brother are there. And he said, okay, call them. So I hadn't realized what that implied. And then he said, no, call your mother and brother. So I went to the edge of the veranda, and I signaled, and they came, and we had our first interview with Baba. And I still remember what he said to my mother. He told her, the moment we entered the room, he started talking to my mother, and he said, from now onwards, these children are not your responsibility, they are my responsibility. And I will take care of them. So that's the promise he gave to my mother. And of course, we had a very blissful time in that interview. And after the interview, I went back to the hostel, and my mother went back to the room in the ashram. So when I went back to the hostel, because I used to get up early in the morning, so I retired, and then somebody woke me up a little later. I think it was about 9 o'clock or so, and he said, "Brother, wake up! Swami's prasadam is there." So I got up, and then I saw that there was a tiffin carrier, and what used to happen was, the tiffin carrier used to go from the hostel for Swami, and then Swami would partake of it or bless it, and if he took something, partook of it, then whatever was left was brought back as prasadam, and whatever he blessed also was brought back as prasadam. So because I was in room A1, so on the first night I got Swami's prasadam. So this was a very auspicious beginning for me when I joined Swami's Institute, and we all sat there enjoying that prasadam. Um, so that is how I joined the hostel, and I joined Swami's college. And before I joined Swami's college, Swami had already appeared to me. Swami used to appear in my dream a lot in Udhampur, and usually most of the time he would talk to me about Vedas. So and most of the dreams would be we are on a walk, and Swami would explain things about the Vedas. Most of that I would not remember when I woke up what he said to me, but some of it I would remember. And one of the things I recollect, which he told me, was that the Veda is a way of life. It's not just a scripture or something. So I was very keen that I should learn Vedas when I came to Swami's college. In fact, I didn't know that Swami's Ved Pathshala had closed, and I was very interested in learning them. So after I joined Swami's hostel, and I joined Swami's college, life was amazing. Those days there was no line to go to college. Sorry, I'm sorry, to go to Darshan. So if you didn't have a class and you were free, you could go and sit in the mandir. So all students, they would immediately have a bath and get ready and go to and sit in the college. Sometimes Swami would call us and give us some work. Otherwise, we would just sit there and study. So and of course there was no regulation like if you didn't have a class you can't go to the hostel and so on. So what we would do is, if suppose in the afternoon we didn't have class, we would come back to the hostel and then have a bath and go straight to the mandir and then sit and wait for Swami's darshan, which was very, very nice. And students used to do everything. Students used to make do the work in the Gokulam. So students used to work at the zoo. Students used to do door duty. So a lot of stuff which students used to do, and a lot of responsibilities used to be there. So now, during this particular time, Swami would come. Sometimes he would come to the hostel unexpectedly. Sometimes he would walk into the classrooms in the college unexpectedly, and so on. So life was wonderful. And then I remember in the first month, Swami, suddenly word came that Swami wants you in the mandir. So I went there with a group of students, and then Swami, he gave us Seva Dal scarves. So then during that time when Swami, he called, he said, I'm going to give you a special duty, and he gave us these Seva Dal scarves one by one. He put it around our neck, and then he gave us a small talk about what our duties would be. And the gist of the talk was that whenever Swami went out, we would have to accompany Swami and escort him. So that was a wonderful thing. So we used to look forward to that. Swami's jeep used to come, and then we would, the driver would tell the principal that, Swami is going out and he needs the students. And then we would rush out, sit in the jeep, and we would go ahead, and Swami's car would come, and then we would go ahead of Swami's car, and then we could see Swami sitting in the car, and we would accompany him to wherever he went. So this is one of the places he went in Saigram, where we went, accompanied Swami. So that was another wonderful opportunity for me. And then after during that time, I told my father, I said, my father, said that your Upanayam has not been done. So he requested Swami. He said, I would, Swami, can you do the Upanayam for my sons? And Swami readily agreed, very graciously he agreed. And then he came to us and he said, tomorrow is Sunday, so we will talk about. I will do the Upanayam on Sunday when you come in the morning. And he teased us. He said, you don't know how to wear a dhoti and all, so you can wear the pant and shirt, and then you can come for the Upanayam. So he agreed to do the Upanayam, and the Upanayam was another amazing experience. Swami created the sacred thread. It was still wet with kumkum and haldi and saffron, and it smelled divine. And then he unraveled it and he opened it, and then he showed it to everybody, and he put it over the shirt. He put it over our shirt and uh, chanted some mantras, and then told us the significance of the Gayatri Mantra, and he made us chant the Gayatri Mantra with him, after him, 3 times. And then another thing he talked to us about was the Omkar. He said Omkar is very important. In fact, after that I became interested in finding out about the Omkar. So he told us how to chant the Om, and he chanted it for us. And he said it's like imagine an aeroplane coming from a distance when it's approaching you, and then as it approaches you, sound grows louder and louder until it reaches a crescendo when it is passing over your head, and then it fades away into the distance, and then there is silence. So that is how you should chant the Om. So he chanted it for us. I'll just chant it one time for you. So it's like So after the Om fades, it goes into Shunya, nothingness. So after that, I became interested in the Omkar, and I did some research. In the Gita, it's called as Om of the Vedas. In Gita Vahini also, Swami says Om of the Vedas is the basic, it's the Maha Mantra. It's from which all mantras come. And in the Mandukya Upanishad, it's very clearly given that Omkaram can give you everything. It can give you material wealth, it can give you intellectual wealth and spiritual wealth, and also, a lot more. So when we chant Omkaram, this is why Swami has told us to chant Om early in the morning 21 times, and but that is the reason. So when he did the Upanayam, he taught us these two things: how to chant the Omkar mantra and the significance of the Gayatri mantra and how to chant that. Excuse me, and how to chant that. And then he took us inside the inner interview room and said very carefully to adjust the sacred thread. So inside the shirt before we go out, and we did that. And it was such a beautiful experience. He made my brother stand in one corner of the inner interview room and myself on the other corner, and then he whispered a mantra in my ear, and I whispered a mantra in my brother's ear, and then he hugged us, which is Shakti path. When the Guru transfers energy to the Shishya. So he did it in perfect Vedic style, and I cannot be grateful enough to Bhagwan for all that he did that day. And then, of course, the Upanayam ceremony got over. We came out, and we were in another world. So during my time in Puttaparthi, I had to do a lot of things. I had to unlearn whatever I had learnt in the world. I had to relearn whatever Swami was trying to teach us. And but most of the time, Swami, he kind of, for me, as personally, he stressed on do your duty all the time. So that was the message. That was the thing for me. And then, of course, he told me to talk to me about Lal Bal and Pal. So, pictures which I have with Swami. So, I was fortunate enough to escort Swami on the motorcycle. So, after we finished and Swami reached the mandir, he took pictures with all of us. This is Kartik Somvar, when Swami's, according to Telugu calendar, Swami's birthday falls on Kartik Somvar. So we got this time I got an opportunity to do Aarti and remove the evil eye from Swami and all. So after I had done the Aarti and I had kept it down, and Swami took the match. Swami had lighted the Aarti for me, so he had the match all the time in his hand, matchbox all the time in his hand. And after I finished the Aarti and I took Namaskar and I got up, he took the matchbox and he put it in my pocket. So that's the picture there. And then I was fortunate enough to be in the band. So the first group of students who was chosen for the band, one evening I remember Swami just called us. Some of us, he picked us up from the veranda, said, "Come," and very excitedly, like the Divine Mother that he is, he said, "We are going to form a band and I have chosen you." And then he told each of us what instrument we should play and blessed us. And, that's how the band began. And then because birthday was coming and we had to perform there. So every day then it was our duty to go and practice and be ready for the birthday. So there were some military instructors who had come to teach us. So every day we would be there, and Swami had told us that you don't have to come for darshan. I will come and give you darshan. And he would come, and then every time he came, he would play some pranks, and he would bless us and talk to us and bring some eats and so on. So that was one of the most wonderful times that we spent with Swami. The other picture which you can see there is from the sports meet where Swami is giving away the prizes, and we used to participate in the sports meet because we wanted to take namaskar. So every time we got a prize, we got a namaskar from Swami. Until the time when the number of students increased, and then Swami said, whoever is getting a prize, his name should be called one time, and all the prizes should be given together. So life in Swami's college was really delightful in those days. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is, an experience that I had sitting in the mandir about how experience about the Shiv Tandav. So what actually happened was I got a glimpse of Shiv Tandav, but not Shiva himself in the form of Swami. It so happened that one Sunday morning, after giving the interviews, while we waited for the bhajan to begin, I was sitting in the veranda reading a book called The Holy Man and the Psychiatrist. This is written by Samuel Sandwich, if you know. I had just finished reading a description of how Sage Bhardwaj stood waiting to invite Shiva and Parvati for a yagna while they were engrossed doing the tandav. And while reading this, soon I began musing, trying to picturize how Lord Shiva would look while doing the tandav. And at that moment, the interview room door opened quietly, and Swami stepped out. So, sensing his presence more than, because nobody had realized Swami had stepped out, I looked up. And I saw Swami looking directly at me with an urgent look in his eyes. So now if you look at this picture here, you can see the diagram. here. So I was sitting in this part of the mandir, and Swami appeared here. He stepped out of the interview room door, and he appeared there. So I I kind of looked up and I saw him looking directly at me with an urgent look. He had this urgent look in his eyes, as if to asking me to pay attention. So I immediately became alert and focused on Swami. So I was sitting somewhere in the middle, as you can see there, where it is circled there. I was sitting in the middle of the veranda, slightly forward towards the outside, just about where the samadhi is now. And this is where I usually sat, as I could see the interview room door directly. And it seemed as if no one had noticed Swami, for I could see that no one had lifted their head to look at Swami. And then Swami began to sway. While I was watching, Swami began to sway, not slowly as he usually did, but with a quick rhythmic movement. And this rhythm, the movement was inexpressibly, beautifully rhythmic. And then after a few moments of that rhythmic dance, Swami took a step forward, and lo and behold, the next instant he was in front of the middle doors of the bhajan hall. So he had actually crossed from here till here in one step. And then he was again, when he reached the center of the veranda, he was swaying in the same beautiful, indescribably beautiful, energetic rhythm. And then when this was happening, the atmosphere was mysteriously charged with a powerful energy. And then everything subsided and became normal as Swami's body relaxed, and he looked at me smiling sweetly and moved on as if nothing had happened. I sat astounded while trying to come to terms with the fact that Swami had just shown me a glimpse of the Shiv Tandav. And here in the next this thing you can see the diagram. This is where I was sitting, and here this is the interview room, and this is where Swami was standing. And then when he looked at me, and there are two pillars. This pillar is a big one, but this is even bigger. These pillar 2 and pillar 3, they are even bigger. And there's a lot of distance to cover between here and the bhajan hall door in the middle. And Swami did that in one step. So he actually transcended time and space, because nobody realized that this had happened. So this was how I got a glimpse of the Shiv Tandav. And that is, again, I am so grateful to Baba, because whenever I sit for my meditation, I just have to remember that, and I don't have to struggle to focus my mind. Another experience that I would like to talk about at this point of time is a prayer that I did to Swami. In those days, during holidays, students were allowed to sleep in the premises of the mandir. So every evening after dinner, you would see students approaching the mandir from all sides, carrying their rolled beds with them. And each of us had our own favorite place to sit in the mandir. Of course, the most preferred place was below the window of Swami's room, and we had of course, we had to get up very early, because we had to make way for the people to do parikrama, or circling of the mandir, circumambulation of the mandir, which began at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the watchman would wake us, very, very quietly, and we would silently roll up our beds. Then we would rush home, and we would bathe and return for the parikrama. So one day, after completing my parikrama, I would say a small prayer standing below Swami's window. And one day, when I stood, when you stood there, to do a prayer standing under Swami's below Swami's window, it was always thrilling to do that, to stand there and pray, knowing that behind the window, the Sakshat Narayana himself resided, and it felt as if one was in Vaikuntha itself. So one day when I finished my parikrama and I stood there, I prayed to Swami and I said, Swami, striving for self-realization is really difficult, but you are God, and if you so wish, you can grant it to me in a moment. After that, I went home and soon got involved in my daily chores and forgot about my prayer. That very warm morning, Swami called, my family for an interview. And then everyone entered the interview room with delight. We all sat there mesmerized. Time flies when you are with Swami. And then, towards the end of the interview, nearing the end of the interview, Swami addressed me. I was sitting in the corner near the entrance to the inner interview room, and he said, "Kya pray karta hai, pagal?" So, I didn't recall what I had prayed in the morning. So then, seeing that I didn't recall praying, he added, "Subah ko, subah ko." So with those words, he nudged my memory, and I immediately remembered my prayer and became electrified, thinking, now I am going to get realization. So I replied excitedly. I said, "Yes, Swami, I prayed." Now, what you have to understand is, nothing was spoken. Swami didn't say what I prayed. I didn't say what Swami prayed. But there was this understanding about, what was meant. And then, seeing my exuberance, Swami smiled gently and said, de sakta hai, but I don't want to make you lazy. And then he stretched out his hand and said, "Everything is in this hand, sir." So I felt a tad disappointed. Then Swami made me sit near and spoke to me about how I must proceed with my sadhana. And in summary, what he said was, remove the heavy coat of tamoguna. So Swami acted out removing, the heavy coat of tamoguna, and then remove the lighter shirt of rajoguna. And Swami removed his shirt also, acted as if he's removing shirt. And finally, even discard the vest or banyan of guna, sattva guna. And Swami said. And after that, he said, "You can think of mukti." So I fell at Swami's feet and did namaskar with tears in my eyes. Now, the Lord of the universe, having really important things to do, had listened to the crazy, ignorant prayer of a person whose stature was even less than an ant on a blade of grass. Hundreds, nay thousands of devotees would have prayed that day. I can only be eternally grateful he acknowledged mine. It took me several years to really understand the words he said to me that day about not being lazy. Number one, he knows everything, because I hadn't told a soul about what I had prayed. In fact, I had forgotten about it myself, but he had not forgotten about it. Second, I learned that one should be deserving before one asks for anything. In the Ramayana also, when Rama is about to visit the ashram of sage Agastya, Lakshmana exhorts him to ask him for the divine weapons that the sage had received from the Devas. But Rama admonishes him and says, one should not ask for a thing unless one deserves it. So that is one very important aspect of spiritual life. If perchance one does get something which is not deserved, it won't last, because it's not sustainable. So one has to become deserving to get what one has to get. And then in chapter 12 again of Gita Vahini, Swami writes that he is the Paurusha of humanity. Everyone has to exercise Paurusha, the vitality of humanity. For without it, life is impossible. Life itself is impossible. Living is struggling, striving, achieving. God created people to wield the talent of vitality and achieve victory. So these are the lessons that I learned from that particular experience. Another thing was, Swami, finally, how my family reached Lotus feet. All of us reached Baba's Lotus feet. Holidays, we used to wait for the holidays, because many students would go home, and a handful of us would be left there, and then, we would get personal attention from Baba. So, and we used to love that. So we used to wait for the holidays to come. So one holiday, I came to know that Swami was picking up students and sending them home. So I hid, I sat at the back and I hid behind a pillar and all. But you think that that would solve the problem? It didn't. Swami came out looking for me. He asked the warden where I was, and he actually went inside the bhajan hall, and then he came out and he saw me hiding behind the pillar, and he said, "Hey, that's come." And he called me in front and he said, You have to go home to Patna. So I made an excuse and I said, you and your brother, he said, you have to go to Patna. I made an excuse and I said, Swami, I don't know how to go to Patna because that's where my father was, working. And he said, don't worry, I have made, Swami, he's one step ahead of us all the time. He said, don't worry, I've made arrangements. There was, a gentleman working in the primary school who came from that area, and Swami had already told him to book the tickets. So he was sitting there, and Swami asked him, did you book the tickets? And he said, yes, Swami. He told me, he said, you have to go with him. So, we were, so I then we had, there was nothing I could say. So I said, okay, Swami. And then Swami was so pleased, as if I had done something great. And he said, good boy, good boy. And, he told me to take namaskar. But one of the things that stuck in my mind, which he said was, you must help your parents with shifting. Now, my mother had, when I had spoken to my parents, they had said that, they didn't like the house where they were staying and, they wanted to shift to another place. So when Swami, this is Maya, when Swami said, help your parents shifting, I said, oh, okay, because Swami wants us to help our parents to shift, so that's why he's sending us there. But that was not it. What Swami meant was, help my parents to shift to Puttaparthi. And how did that happen? When I went there, to stay with my parents, one day my father took me to his factory. And, Mohan Meekans is a big brand in North India. They make all kinds of beverages. So, I kind of, he took me around but along with beverages, there are also alcohol. So when he took me around, I saw one big place where they made alcohol. And when, he asked me, I was sitting, he proudly asked me, so what do you think about the factory? Because he had built it. He's an engineer, so he had built that factory and he was very proud of it. And then, very slowly, I just told him, I said, that thing, that alcohol, the place where you make alcohol, how many lives would it destroy and so on. Now, I just said that casually because I said everything else is fine, but that the place where you make alcohol, it could destroy so many lives. That point, it struck in his mind. It struck him and it stayed in his mind. And that is when he decided that, he didn't want to continue with this particular job. So that's what Swami meant. So that you have to help your parents with shifting. Another experience I had in Patna was, another fantastic experience. I was sitting at home. It was, the afternoon time, and I was doing my Sandhya Vandanam, and it was ending. I was ending my Sandhya Vandanam. I was doing the Gayatri Japa, and 108 times, And while I was doing the Gayatri Japa, suddenly my mind shifted into a higher consciousness, and what I experienced was divine light, a sea of light. And the light, it was like waves of light. And across these waves of light, I heard Swami's voice. And he told me, your grandmother is not well. You must go to Delhi and spend some time with her. And after I finished my japa and I came back from this beautiful experience, I told my parents, I said, Swami has instructed like this, we should go and me and my brother should go and visit my grandmother because Swami said she's not well. Then my father told me, he said, yes, we didn't want to tell you because, we didn't want to upset you. She had fallen in the bathroom and she had injured her hip, and because of her age, at that time she could not be operated. So she was bedridden, and that's why Swami wanted us to go there. So then my father said, but in this, there were only about 10 days left so to go to Puttaparthi, and he said, well, in such a short time, how can we, railway tickets were very difficult to arrange in those days. So how can we arrange for railway tickets? Then I told him, I said, Swami has asked us to go there. Swami will certainly make arrangements. So the next day, I went to the railway station and I stood in line. And by that time, they had started this fast train, to Delhi, where she was. from Patna. So, they called it Shatabdi Express at that time. So I stood in the line for that particular train, and when I reached the counter, I asked him. I said, "Do you have tickets for Delhi?" And he said, he looked in his chart and he said, "Yes, one ticket is there. Somebody just cancelled and you got it." I said, "Only one ticket," because my brother also had to come. So he said, "Yeah, only one ticket." I said, "No, no, look carefully. There must be another seat." Then he looked at me strangely and he said, "Okay, let me see." And then he obliged. This is Swami's grace, because railway officials usually don't oblige so easily. And he looked carefully, and somebody had scratched over one particular seat which was empty. So he said, "No, no, yes, one more seat is there right next to you." And it is covered by somebody's handwriting, so I didn't see it. And that's how we got two tickets. So we got the two tickets for Shatabdi Express next day. And the next day we left for Delhi. When I arrived, to see my grandmother, she told us, she said, "Ganesha told me that you will be coming." So that was another amazing experience I had. So we spent 10 days with my grandmother, and then after that we left for Puttaparthi. So that was another amazing experience that I had. So now the last thing which I'm going to cover for this particular talk is, how did my family finally come to Puttaparthi? So we were talking about Bhagavad Gita with Swami one day, and then Swami said, why should only a few of you get the benefit of listening to the Bhagavad Gita? I will give a discourse. So he decided to give a discourse, and he said he will start that week, and he started the discourse. So now hardly 1 or 2 days had passed by when the discourse had begun. My father decided to give us a surprise. So he came to Puttaparthi on his own without telling anybody. And I remember he took a lift from the milk van early in the morning from Dharmavaram, which came from Dharmavaram to Puttaparthi. And he was here before Darshan, and just before Darshan he reached, and he sat down for Darshan. So when Swami came back after his darshan, he said, "Hey, your father has come." I said, "No, Swami, he's in Patna." He said, "No, no, he is there. I saw him. He's sitting in the darshan line." And then he said, "Come with me." And he took me inside the bhajan hall, and he said, he showed me a place, and he said, "Tell your father from today onwards he should sit here for the discourses, the Gita discourses which Swami gave every evening." So after the darshan was over, after Aarti was over and Swami had retired, I went looking for my father, and I found him, and then I told him what Swami had told me. And of course, he was allowed to sit there. Now, he had come only for a couple of days. But because Swami had given that place, he could not leave. So he extended his leave. He called his boss and he extended the leave, and he stayed until all the discourses got over, which was almost more than a month. So on the last day of Swami's discourse, after Swami had finished, Swami came to him, and very graciously Swami asked him, "How did you like my discourse?" And he said, "Swami, it was wonderful." And said, "How do you like Puttaparthi?" "Swami, it's wonderful." Then he said, "Would you like to stay here?" So my father told Swami, "Swami, whatever you say." And Swami said, "Okay, then stay here. I'll give you a room." And that's it. And then Swami went off. After giving him namaskar, Swami went off, and my father came and he said, "This is what Swami told me." And immediately he went and he called his boss and he said, "I'm not coming back." His boss, shouted and all that. He said, "Sorry, I can't do." He explained that I'm in Puttaparthi and I'm now decided to stay here, and Swami has given me his blessings, so I'm not coming back. You will not believe, till today, our luggage, even our car, everything was in Patna. Till today, it is right there. It is stored there. My father has not gone back to take it. From that day till today, which is more than 30 years, he is there in Puttaparthi. So this is how Swami's charisma, Swami's compassion, Swami's grace brought my family to Puttaparthi. So with this, talk, there are a lot of things I would like to share with you, but there is not enough time. And there are many wonderful things, and like they say, if you take the ocean as the ink and the earth as the parchment, and Ganesha is writing the story, even then it's not enough to write the Leelas of Bhagwan. So I would like to take leave, and I would like to thank the organizers to give me this opportunity to talk about Swami and share these wonderful experiences and have satsang with all of you. Stay safe. May Swami always protect you and be with you all the time, blessing you. Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you. And Jai Sairam, Gautam sir. The chanting of Om, like the takeoff and landing of an aircraft, was a deep insight shared. The value of Omkar chanting 21 times, Omkar as the Bija Mantra. The Upanayanam which Bhagwan performed for your both brothers and the Shaktipat given was a lifetime moment which any devotee can aspire for. The photograph experience with Swami sharing his signature was mesmerizing. Your movements from Delhi, the first visit to Bhagwan in 1982 when you had your Darshan, and your journey to Puttaparthi as a student. Physically, it's a very long journey, but in the lifetime of a person, when we know where we have to reach, that is the best thing one can aspire for. A very interesting thing was golf is played by old people and you should concentrate on your studies. I think that was a wonderful explanation and a nudge which Bhagwan gave to convince us to do our job. Another amazing facet was your desire to fast till Swami talks. I think that involves a lot of conviction and faith, and this kind of leap of faith which passeth understanding. I think any literature student will cherish this leap of faith. But your journey towards scriptures and how Swami unfolded various aspects is something amazing. All of us love to be with Bhagwan, and Bhagwan chooses the right moment and the span given. But I think what was most remarkable also was your visit to the Patna factory, where your father had built the factory for Mohan Meekins. But one subtle word and a nudge on the alcohol had a lasting impact on your father. I think these are words where, when you speak once, but they stay in your heart and mind forever. And we cherish these kind of experiences. And we love to have these kind of experiences more and more. Your experiences with meditation and Swami coming in dreams frequently. And in a lighter vein, I must say that when we were in Trayee, how Swami used to tease you and rag you about your future wedding, which was going to happen sooner than later. I still remember your blushes and your flabbergasted expressions and Swami's mesmerizing laughter in the Trayee, which only we can experience. I have never seen Swami smile or laugh, be it in Puttaparthi or any other place, but I must say that maybe I am biased to Brindavan, but those moments relived and flashed across our mind, and how time flies. I think your family first met Bhagwan in 81, and this is the 40th year, so how time flies. But the key thing we would like to cherish is Bhagawan did your Upanayanam, showed you how to chant Om, did the Shakti Path, I think even performed your wedding. I think we are all fortunate that we could see this experience and comprehend now what we have received. I think your family and all of us would love to have this kind of prarabdha and to have this kind of blessings from Bhagwan. And finally, we would like to say, as a Hindu, we must chant Om and the Upanayanam. And the way you put it so succinctly and the way Swami did it for you is something we can learn from and hope we can pass this to our family and generations to come. So Jai Sai Ram, and we loved this personally, this experience, and I am fascinated on this side of Gautam Sir, which was not known to us, though we have seen you many times. But this experience, this 122nd edition of July 18th Samarpan will be indelibly imprinted in our head, heart and mind. Jai Sai Ram.